Joining us right now, look at that, it's Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, our friend and Fox News regular now. Of course, he is the author of Operation Dark Heart, Spycraft on Special Operations on the Front Lines of Afghanistan and the Path to Victory. He wrote that book because he was a CIA-trained former senior intelligence officer there in Afghanistan on the days following 9/11, and that's why we wanted to talk to you today. Thanks for joining us, Colonel Shaffer.
Hey, Larry, good to be on. Thanks for having me.
So the president announced yesterday in a joint press conference with the president of Afghanistan that he is going to be slowing down his plan to bring back our troops, cut them in half. He was going to in the next month or so, I believe. And now they're going to stay at these troop levels. What's going on here?
Well, I think if you read the last chapter of my book, they're actually going with what I recommended, about a 10,000 person mix back on offensive operations, managing to train and equip the Afghan forces. And Larry, the big thing there is more about trying to reconcile the Taliban back into the governance of Afghanistan. I think, I've talked about a Northern Ireland-style peace process, and I think that's what's actually at work here. The moment we left out of there, we took most of our troops out, it actually cleared the way for us to not be the issue and to let things start kind of going where they should, whereas, you've got the Afghan government trying to bring the Taliban in. And let me be clear on this. Well, the Taliban is a terrorist organization. If they're actually excluded from the political process, they have no choice but to attack the process. So I think the reconciliation should be the key. I think the president's finally got the message. And the other thing, obviously, is I think abandoning the mission like he did in Iraq proved to be, conclusively bad.
Yeah.
So I think he's learned from that mistake, and I'd like to believe he's moving forward in a prudent way based on recommendations from military leadership.
And how will these troops be used, do you imagine?
Well, three things. First, easily training and equipping and training the troops. That's a big part of the mission, is trying to maintain the very large, over 200,000-man army we helped build for the Afghan government. Secondly, essentially aviation support, logistical support, all those things that Brian, they cannot do well on their own. They really don't have a lot of high-tech understanding people, so I think we've got to help them continue to resupply and that sort of thing. And, of course, the thing that I believe is most important is intelligence gathering and special operations, basically being back on the offensive.
Well, listen, I agree that this is probably the right thing to do, especially when we look at Iraq and see how badly it went. And as soon as there was a vacuum present, the terrorists love a good vacuum, and they'll rush right in to fill it. But here's my question. I mean, do we ever get to the point where the troops there are self-sufficient?
The answer is yes. When that point is, I honestly don't know. But let's remember, Brian, we've never departed Japan, Korea, Germany. We still have bases there after the war. So I think it's in our interest to make sure that it may not be a governance we approve of. That is to say that there's probably going to be some political turmoil at times. We may not appreciate their leaders. But the biggest thing is to make sure there is some form of governance there. Because as you point out so clearly, Brian, is that, an absence of governance is a magnet for terror, and I think that's what we have to do here, is make sure that the spaces that are there are somehow governed by some level of governance that will allow for us to work with them to push out terrorist organizations.
All right, so given that, and frankly, what you described, Tony Shaffer, seems to be, you're saying this is more of a long-term investment. This is a long-term strategy.
Right.
Given that, and I don't disagree with that, is 9,800 troops enough? Do we need actually to increase what we have there?
No, I think actually, Larry, I think that's about the right balance. We have to be able to strike effectively. When I was there, I'll be blunt. When I was there, we were feared. They are very tribal, and we were the most badass tribe on the ground. Don't mess with us. And I think that's where I think we need to get back on that. Instead of being occupiers, we need to be feared. At the same time, we need to be offering a hand of help to help them organize and do things. I think we don't need a lot of people. If we get too many people in the way, we become the target. And I think we learned some very bad lessons from that in Afghanistan.
All right, so looking at the Iran negotiations and the stories that have come out in the last 24, 36 hours that have to do with people at the White House complaining that the Israelis were spying on the secret talks between the U.S. and Iran. The Israelis were monitoring those conversations, and then they turned around and gave that information to members of Congress. What do you make out of all of that mess?
Well, if I were the Israelis, I'd be doing the same thing based on the double dealing I've seen coming through the negotiation process. And let's be clear on this. The Congress, I've been in several meetings, both private and public, with members of Congress and staff. And frankly, Brian, Congress complains they're getting nothing in the way of information from the executive branch anytime they ask for it. So someone's got to give it to them, and if it's the Israelis, God bless them. And the other thing,
we shouldn't be surprised that the Israelis were doing this, right?
Well, I'm not surprised, because this is, they have an existential threat that they're much closer to than we are. So I think they are clearly acting in what they believe to be their interests. And I think, look, I don't believe for a minute that they're doing anything that's inimical to our interests at this point in time.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that Congress does deserve the information, and I can't believe the White House is complaining about something that they should be doing, is basically informing Congress of progress.
Speaking of that, you mentioned the White House complaining about it, and we spoke earlier with KT McFarland about that. It's sort of been I can't let this go. This was floated out there by an anonymous White House source with one reason and one reason only, and that is to undercut Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government. Now, your book is full of secrets. It's full of leaked information and stuff that you got based on your first-hand knowledge, but also through your sources. And I mean, the government doesn't let you say anything. I mean, your book is full of things censored out, blacked out, and redacted. What do you make of this White House, who's always been so concerned about leaking, now purposely going out and leaking things anonymously to make our allies look bad?
Well, let's remember, that's not the first time this happened. John Brennan was given a big pass on this, Larry, when he was up for confirmation. He actually leaked information about a double agent that was used to thwart the second underwear bomber if he get to the press. So this White House will leak whatever it is to include critical intelligence information when they see fit to make a political point. Clearly, as you guys just both mentioned, this was a political point meant to undermine the Israelis and Bibi in particular. So clearly, they have no problem throwing anybody under the bus when it suits their political purposes.
Yeah. All right, Tony. And what are your sources telling you, by the way, just in terms of the mood at the Pentagon? Whenever we have you on, you always have some pretty good sources that are a little disgruntled by what's going on at the White House and their relationship with the Pentagon. Any better at all?
Well, the Pentagon feels it's being put between a rock and a hard place. I spoke to a very senior political Pentagon person recently, and it was very clear that the Pentagon is trying to defend its own equities. Those equities are not always in line with the White House's, and it puts them in a very difficult predicament. Their job is to defend the country, not defend the political party of the White House, which is the Democrat Party. And I think they are often kind of put in a difficult position to do that. So.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, always a pleasure, my friend.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks a lot.